Anybody has questions or anything like that, like I'll let anybody pop in and we'll just see, who joins and what they have to contribute to the conversation. So today, I mean, what we wanted to kind of talk about, and we haven't done one of these in forever, but uh, Tulsi Gabbard declassified a few reports, and obviously that kind of blew up on X today. So wanted to do a space and just kind of open it up and talk about it a little bit. Seems to be a little bit of momentum behind declassification, so that seems to be a positive. And hopefully, they're going to continue declassifying and releasing a lot, and that's going to be important. So, going to address this. They put out a timeline document, and then they put out a couple different reports. They released a September ICA report, and then they released a mid-level ICA report from January 2017, as well as a handful of emails as well. Would have loved to have seen them actually declassify and release the high-level ICA report, and then they have some conclusions in here that are, quite honestly, they're unsupported by evidence, and it would have been great for them to declassify and release all the evidence so that we could see it for ourselves. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Also, they put it out with a subject and sort of like a headline and few tweets as well with sort of a narrative, which I didn't personally like. They basically said, this is Obama's plan or whatever they called it, this conspiracy, and like all that might be true, but like if you want credibility, I didn't necessarily like seeing that narrative come out, especially because they didn't actually declassify a whole lot of documents with this. So didn't really like to see that. Um, a few important things that came out. So there's more indications now that the Steele dossier was a primary component of the actual ICA. It was previously known to be an annex to the ICA report. In recent weeks, we got a little bit more detail on that and sort of the debate going back and forth between the FBI and the other intelligence agencies about its inclusion into the ICA itself. And they offer us a conclusion. I think it's in the timeline document. And they say between the election, date of the election, the ICA, they'd obtained additional information. And what they offer us is that additional information was the Steele dossier. So the Steele dossier is what took the ICA report from a few conclusions with low confidence to what the ICA report became, which is, we have high confidence that Russia interfered and did so for the benefit of Donald Trump, and they wanted to hurt Hillary Clinton. And all of that apparently ties back to the Steele dossier. Now, I'm going to be critical again, because why not just release all those emails? I mean, everything relating to, how and why the Steele dossier was included, they could have released that. They could have declassified it, and then we could have known that and read it for ourselves. Instead, we were supposed to kind of accept the conclusion that, yeah, they knew, and like the Steele dossier made up that, took it from the low confidence to high confidence. So I didn't like that. Maybe other people have opinions. I get that. And, it is what it is. So we have the timeline document. It's 11 pages. And then we have the ICA reports. And one of the things I highlighted in my Substack, reading through this, and I think I saw a few people on social media, there's a lot of conclusions about election board hacks and a lot of information relating specifically to the potential or likelihood that Russia wanted to interfere with the election system and actually influence the vote. And that's kind of been out of the news. I mean, that was sort of a narrative or an idea around the time of the election, so it makes sense that they looked at that. But with this break and revisiting this now, I think people are a little bit misled, or a few people are, that, oh, well, they had evidence that Russia didn't interfere because this or that section says, we don't have information that Russia intended to, hack the election system. Well, that's a specific nuance to a much broader narrative. Obviously, the key component is, did they hack the DNC specifically, and are they responsible for the Guccifer 2.0 persona? And that's really the linchpin of the entire narrative. Some of the election board hacks and stuff like that. It's considered a component, but like that's not really a driving piece of this, in my opinion, at least. So a lot of the focus is on sort of that state board of election hacks and what the Russians did, and so that comprises a significant portion of this ICA. So for me, I sort of discount those sections because it just doesn't drive the conversation for me as much. We got details, a little bit more detail. There was a meeting that we knew about previously where Obama, the team, they all got together and said, President Obama wants this ICA report. It's like December 9th. And they only had a few weeks left in the term. So they were going to have to do a very fast job of analysis. And, it's a little bit, it's going to be a rush job. Check my DMs here. Okay, I got you. Yep. And one of the things that came out, and this was pointed out a week or two ago, I think Hans called it out, the same night that they had this meeting, basically saying we want to do an ICA report. The Washington Post puts out this story that the CIA has an assessment where they concluded that Russia intervened in the 2016 election, and not only was that false, but the CIA didn't even have an assessment that contained that assessment. So obviously there's a leak there intending to set a narrative that was completely false. A few days later, December 14th, there's another leak to NBC News saying U.S. intelligence officials have high confidence that Putin was personally involved. Which is false, right? They're still doing the assessment, and more and more it looks like they really didn't have any evidence whatsoever beyond the Steele dossier. At least that's sort of what we're led to believe. So a lot of trouble with that. Again, it would be great to see the high level ICA. It would be great to see HPSC's report on the ICA, which was recently released back to the committee. So hopefully we get to see that soon, because one of the things that I picked up when I was reading the January 2017 ICA, the mid-level ICA, some of those blurbs, I mean, you can kind of tell the influence that the Steele dossier had on that report. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to find that page real quick. And I'm going to do like a detailed analysis at some point where I actually dig into this and see if I can tie it back to the Steele dossier, because some of these conclusions, even the headers I thought were kind of weird. Like the table of contents, section 1 is like Putin ordered campaign to influence election. Section 2 is Russian campaign was multifaceted. Section 3 is influence effort was boldest yet in the United States. Section 4 is 2016 influence campaign could have been more extensive. And Section 5 is election operation signals new normal in Russian influence efforts. And those are weird conclusions. Those are weird headers for an ICA where they really don't have any evidence. And particularly to the extent they're relying on the Steele dossier, I thought that was very odd. But then some of these sections, and I'm on page 88 of what was released, I just pick up vibes that come straight from the Steele dossier and the Steele reporting. Let me see if I can isolate one. In trying to influence the U.S. election, we assess the Kremlin sought to advance its long-standing desire to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order, the promotion of which Putin and other senior Russian officials view as a threat to Russia and Putin's regime. That's kind of weird. That's a weird thing to say. And then there's another one here, and this one I thought was, maybe something that Steele might have offered. Putin most likely wanted his intelligence services to discredit Secretary Clinton because he has blamed her since 2011 for inciting mass protests against the regime in late 2011 and early 2012, and holds a grudge for comments he almost certainly saw as disparaging him, judging from press reporting. Like that, that's a weird thing for an intelligence service to be predicating an assessment on. There some of this is like open source. They're basing it on reporters in Russia, which is subjective, obviously. And then like another bullet point, Putin believed the Panama Papers disclosure in the Olympic doping schedule were U.S. directed efforts to defame Russia, judging from redaction. And his public comments suggesting he sought to use disclosures to discredit the image of the United States and cast it as hypocritical. Like some of the stuff, like you could almost say, like that feels like something Christopher Steele had voiced. And there's a few others in here, and like I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of influence in the dossier that they were really underrepresenting for a number of years here. There's a few other sections that were sort of interesting. There is a lot of coverage again of like open source. What RT was doing and some of these other media outlets that have ties to Russia. We saw that in the unclassified report, and would assume it's going to be similar. But it's always been bizarre that they predicate an intelligence assessment based on what RT was saying in 2012's presidential election. That's a very odd thing to do for an intelligence assessment, in my opinion, at least. Let me scroll down to a few of these emails, because one of the things that came out was a whistleblower. So, or at least they was designated as whistleblower for purposes of this release. And they were involved in the September ICA report. And the September ICA report seems to me to be pretty fair. It's like, yeah, Russia might have done it, but we have low confidence in this assessment. We don't have any technical data. Some pretty high level analysis, which makes sense because it was new. But I think it was relatively fair. I mean, it wasn't leaning into this narrative that Russia was behind everything too hard. So between September and then January, the assessment just totally flips. And now it's like, oh yeah, Russia is interfering in the election because they wanted to help Donald Trump and they wanted to hurt Secretary Clinton. And if there's nothing but the Steele dossier, supporting that, it's not a good look for our intelligence community. But this whistleblower was basically sidelined in the creation of the 2017 ICA. He apparently expressed some concerns, and then he got taken off email, so he wasn't involved at all. And then we got some more emails, I think, within the body of the larger release. And it seems to be a FOIA request that kicked this off. And then all of a sudden, some emails get forwarded around, and this guy's like, wait a minute, like, if Steele's reporting is in this dossier, people have been lied to. And it's like, yeah, that's probably true. So it becomes really interesting. I'd be curious to see what access that whistleblower had. Was he read into some of the compartmentalized, compartmented intelligence that is important to know, and to the extent that you could have an intelligence community assessment, and then years later, somebody that worked on it didn't even realize that what they were putting in there was based on Christopher Steele. Is pretty eye opening. So. Let me see if there's a few other points that I can make, but obviously, like, I'm going to open the floor up. I mean, if anybody else wants to speak, go ahead and request, and we'll definitely open it up, and then we'll see what else gets released. I mean, hopefully there's momentum now, right? I mean, you see all the clicks. There's an awful lot of clickbait out there where people are saying like this is explosive and this proves a conspiracy, and you see Congress members in particular reporting like, "Oh, we got him," that kind of thing, and we're not quite there. I mean, not based on this report, not in my opinion, at least. And it sure would be nice to see a lot more documents. So we'll add you. Let me see. Mitchko, what's up?
Hey, good evening, everybody. Um, it's good to see How you pronounce that?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's good to see him out and about tonight. But real quick question. This is not really related to the technical stuff, but is
sure.
this the news we think that Solomon was talking about coming out? You remember about a week ago, he was saying expect something big.
Uh, Let me see. Let me see if I can pull that up. I'm not sure I remember.
Yeah, it was about a week and a half ago. I think he was saying like in the next 10 days, expect something big. Just curious if this is it, or maybe there's something else coming.
Let me see if I can find that. I'll have to go back and find that article. I do remember John Solomon putting something out about a week ago, but it's been a busy week, and there's been a few different things to look at. So I don't recall exactly what Solomon had said. I remember him saying something to the effect that stuff was going to get declassified, but it's hard to say whether this is it or not.
Yeah, I haven't seen him come out with anything specifically saying this was it. Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, they've got like a few things in motion. I mean, they finally released Hipsy's report back to them, and I've been waiting for Congressman Crawford to actually release that report. I think he's fully able to do that on his own now, so that would be really good if he did that.
Yeah. All right. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see what else. Yeah, one of the other things I was just looking at, John Ratcliffe did send that criminal referral over on John Brennan. So that is something that is also sort of in the ether right now, um, based on basically Brennan's statements that they didn't include the Steele dossier, and it looks like CIA did want to include that dossier. So that'll be interesting. There are statute of limitations issues there. Oops, sorry about that. I think I exited my own space. So, hey, Weak Cheeks, what's up? Oops, did you want to say something or no?
Oh, sorry about that.
No
I
problem.
just wanted I just wanted your opinion on why would they release this report on a Friday afternoon instead of releasing it on a Monday when the media wasn't going to cover this anyway. But why would they wait till Monday so this would have legs for a few days? That's what that I mean. This whole story doesn't make sense to me in that respect. And then I have a few other questions after that. If you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, you're teeing me up to get on my soapbox. I think the way they've handled a lot of things has been an unmitigated disaster. I do not like them putting this out today. Somebody suggested that they meant to put it out yesterday, and then for some reason it got delayed for a day. So maybe that's the reason. But I would agree. I mean, you put this on a Friday, and then for some reason you still send everybody out saying like hailing this as like a bombshell story, and oh, we caught Obama, and it's like it's a Friday afternoon going into the weekend, and nobody's paying attention. And they didn't really declassify that much. I mean, there's so much other stuff around this that they could have included, and they chose not to. And I think they've done a terrible job of like getting documents out so that we can actually read them. The declassification order was too narrow. They could have included all this, supposed information about the Steele dossier getting included. Instead, we're offered conclusions, and then they like market it up. Like the release on the DNI website, like calls this like Obama's plan or like conspiracy or whatever, which is just like, it's pretty bad. I don't think they have a good handle on what actually happened. I don't think they're digging in the right places, and to the extent that they're actually looking at this at all. And I think they're really struggling to give us the transparency that people want. So that's my soapbox.
And also here's another question.
Sure.
Because Mueller finished his report, and then and then Trump had a regular presidency for 6 months, and then sadly COVID came.
Yep.
Do you think if COVID hadn't come and the country was in lockdown and the media was obviously covering that, do you think these people might have been held accountable, or not, or they couldn't be investigating because you couldn't, everyone's masking and all these, what went on during COVID? Do you think if COVID hadn't come, people might have been held accountable for this?
That's a good question. I don't know. I know that really late in the cycle, Congress issued like 20 subpoenas and then like didn't enforce them at all. As far as Durham's investigation goes, it did delay things. I mean, I know there were witnesses that were reluctant to go meet with him. I know Stefan Halper got deferrals and delays because of that, and things of that nature. And then I don't even know if the Durham team was necessarily collaborating in the same fashion during that period. So it certainly delayed things, but at the same time, I mean, they ultimately didn't offer us too many conclusions, and unfortunately, there's still so much that hasn't been looked at. So, it's hard to say what would have happened without COVID, but there's certainly a tendency to go with a lot of distractions, and they get pulled in a lot of directions, and then all of a sudden, nothing happens, and then election comes, and maybe they declassify like one or two more documents and push a narrative, it seems like. So it's frustrating, but hopefully there's a little bit more effort here.
Yeah, because and then I always say, I'm always posting this, but to me, Russiagate was a conspiracy to defraud the United States from within the government itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, I'm not a lawyer and, statute of limitations, but that to me is a very concise what went on. And there was a conspiracy to defraud the United States from within the government itself. With it, it's just mind blowing what went on. And we all agree that nobody's really been held accountable for this. And it's just very, it's very disturbing.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree. And I think this is where I differ a little bit with some of my colleagues sort of in the corner. Like, if it's a conspiracy case, you really probably are not going to have any trouble finding an overt act that would extend the statute of limitations. Now, there are challenges because I think to get search warrants and some of the other investigative tools that they need to be able to present a viable conspiracy case to a court. So you're going to be hamstrung to some extent there, because presenting the case is sort of predicated on having the information that you're sort of trying to obtain. So they'll be hamstrung a little bit if they actually want to develop this into a criminal case. But there is certainly a viable case, in my opinion, for another year or two here, that they could potentially bring a case. Yeah, I don't see that. I'm not predicting that. I want to make that clear, because they have struggled so much in trying to figure this out, and they don't seem to have a good handle on it. So I'm not predicting a criminal case, but I think there is potentially a criminal case that they could try to bring.
And I mean, obviously, also I think would be interesting is if they really were don't get me wrong, Tulsi's doing a good job, but if they really were really trying, they would get all of Comey's and McCabe's email and texts. That would tell the whole story right there.
Well, it would tell a lot of it. One thing I don't hear anybody talking about anymore is the Mueller team emails, and nobody's ever looked over the shoulder and looked at what Mueller was doing. Not only in the cases against the Trump associates, and we saw a lot of trouble in the Flynn case and the prosecution there. But I'm going to go back to it probably every chance I get. It's the Russians. The cases where he blamed Russia, and it's the
yes.
Internet Research Agency. It's the other individuals for hacking the DNC.
Yes,
it's nobody has looked at that. And one of the points that I made earlier in a text message with a friend is that if they were willing to do all of this based on the Steele dossier, and that's what they're offering us today as a conclusion, is like all of this is based on the Steele dossier. If they're willing to tell all these lies, how can you be so sure about their attribution for the DNC hack when they were at low confidence? Then apparently nothing changed, and then weeks later, on October 7th, they sent out a joint attribution statement blaming Russia for the hack, and they were still asking for data from CrowdStrike and the DNC at that time. So it's like, how can you make that determination when you didn't have the servers yourself, you didn't have the data from CrowdStrike, and it's very ugly. And I cannot believe that nobody is asking the questions about the DNC hack at this point.
Of course, and remember the Concord management showed up. Remember Mueller indicted them. They show up. Mueller indicted them. Mueller closed this thing down. They show up to court to hear the charges, and then the DOJ drops all the charges because it was just another scam.
Yeah, they were getting embarrassed in court, quite honestly. I mean, the Concord lawyers were pretty good, but they were falling all over themselves. And then, you get to the point where it's like, if you actually have evidence, it's so highly classified that it would expose like some legitimate intelligence sources and methods from allies, which are still highly classified. And there's actually another angle that ties into Clinton plan intelligence. And, from what I hear, like it blows up everything, but it's never going to get declassified because, we're trying to protect some of our friends. So it's very ugly. I mean, I would love to see Donald Trump just declassify literally everything related to Russia, because one of the other things that happened was like Jim Comey and some of the others, they refused to renew their security clearances. So when they did that, you can't go interview them and start talking about classified information, particularly older information that they would probably need to refresh their recollections and things like that. So nobody ever really interviewed them. And it's amazing, but it's true. I mean, none of these people have ever, asked, specific tough questions because they didn't renew their security clearances. And if everything was declassified, they wouldn't have that ability to throw up a defense on that. So, it's sort of hamstringing everything by keeping it all classified. I mean, he's really sort of protecting some of these individuals.
It'd also be very interesting. I'll wrap it up quick because I don't want to, take everyone's time here. Thanks for spending so much time on me. But
no problem.
I remember, I believe I remember that Trump went over to England to meet the Queen. This is probably 2017, maybe. And then I don't know if it Rosenstein, they indicted the Russians when Trump was overseas, when this big, what do you call it? He's visiting overseas, and then they show a split screen of Rosenstein. They're indicting Russians. Do you remember this?
I forgot about that. Yeah,
it was crazy because wait a minute, the president of the United States, you couldn't wait a week till he came back. It was just another symbol of them trying to take him down. You know what I mean? He couldn't even have a moment with without a riot scene going on. In other words, he's over in England, he's meeting the Queen, and then they have a split screen and they're indicting people. It looked like End of Days.
I have totally forgotten about that. But
yeah,
I think a lot of people have forgotten, about Russiagate and just how like all encompassing it was. You couldn't turn on TV, any news station without like, the walls are closing in type coverage, citing 5 anonymous sources, and General Flynn's going to flip and Papadopoulos is going to flip, and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And that's why people want transparency at this point. I mean, to the extent that people would say, "Oh, it doesn't matter anymore. It's so old. Like you have to move on." We can't move on until there's accountability, and there's actually still prosecutions going on that Mueller filed, and again, nobody's ever looked at those, and it's a real mess. So,
I'll leave one last thing. This is similar pertaining to the whole Russiagate story. I don't know if you remember when Trump was in the Oval Office and he was taking calls from the president of Australia and I think it was Mexico. And remember, all of his transcripts were leaked.
Yep.
Okay, that was a big story, and I don't think Mr. Comey. I don't know if Mr. Comey was still there, but I don't think Mr. Wray really put a heartfelt investigation into this. But in other words, it's like it's just another symbol of them trying to make him illegitimate. He's in the Oval Office making calls, and I don't want to say the deep state is leaking on him. Do you know what I mean? It's mind blowing.
It is mind blowing. It is.
I'll leave it at that. I follow you all the time, and I appreciate you spending so much time with me. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Levin for Prez, what's up?
Hey, I got a quick question regarding predication.
Sure.
This has been driving me nuts for years. We've had a lot of crap early on about the whole Papadopoulos, Misford, Downer. That was like, we told that forever about how the EC was started by stroke. Stephen and Hans believe that Papa D, and I tend to believe they kind of convinced me that he's just, fabulous, talking a lot of crap. But I'm curious as to your opinion as to what is the predication? What did Stroke put in that EC, I think on July 29th, if I have the date correct, to begin the investigation? What could it possibly be?
Well, I mean, there is, there are some questions still there. I mean, the official version is Alexander Downer had submitted the referral back, and then they open up the EC based on information, and then for some reason, that turned into 4 discrete investigations into like General Flynn and Papadopoulos, and then Carter Page for some reason, and a lot of that, everybody's been pointing to the Steele dossier as the predication on the right, at least, and then the left wing says, well, they didn't have the Steele dossier until in some instances September. Other people are looking at certain dates in July. Like Michael Gaeta had gotten some information, I believe. So there, there's some open questions there. There's even questions dating back, closer to like April of 2016, and sort of the preliminary investigations. There was a New York investigation opened into Carter Page in April. Paul Manafort was getting some investigative attention around then. There was more developing there, but all in all, I mean it was probably like the Steele dossier, Clinton operatives pushing this narrative. I don't know that we'll ever get evidence that really clarifies it, but there's a lot circling, I think, at that point. And then, I'll probably leave it there, but there's probably going to be some more that comes out. I mean, I've heard about this email, which is highly classified, and it's, I don't know if it'll ever come out, but like part of Clinton's plan, you know, there was this email that was sent from Jennifer Palmieri, who was a Clinton campaign official, and she sends it to a member or an official at Open Society Foundations called Leonard Bernardo. And if you go back and you look at some of the John Durham stories, some of the late ones, New York Times, I think, put it out. And they raised this point like, oh, Durham wanted to go look at Leonard Bernardo, and nobody really understood why. And the reason is because there's this email sent from Palmieri to Bernardo, and part of that email details Clinton's plan to spin up this false narrative. And one of the assertions made by Palmieri in that email is that they're going to have the FBI amplify the allegations, which is kind of an inflammatory point. But like when you start looking at it, you realize, well, the FBI did, you know, they did inflame everything, and the entirety of the U.S. government went all in on this narrative, which raises the specter that this is something far more sinister. And you know, with the briefing that was received in July of 2016 with President Obama, they knew. I mean, they knew Clinton was up to no good.
Yep.
And then they had all these reports flying in, and for some reason they still went full speed ahead with it. And then at the end of the day, you got this ICA report like we got today, and you know I've had sources on this for a while now, but you know what they tell me is that Obama ordered the ICA to specifically support one conclusion, that Russia interfered for the benefit of Trump and to hurt Hillary Clinton, and to exclude all evidence to the contrary, which includes the Clinton plan intelligence, which you know they're going to suggest is a disinformation product. But you know, you start digging into it, it doesn't make sense for it to be a disinformation product. So, you know, at minimum, even if you thought it was a disinformation product, you should have included it in the ICA just for completeness.
Right.
And they didn't do that. So there's a lot more to be declassified there, and hopefully we'll see that.
I mean, just one further question. Wouldn't it be a good idea to have Strokes, the EC, declassified? I mean, wouldn't that, you know, settle, you know, at least address some very important questions here?
Well, I think we have pieces of it, right?
I'm not certain. I'm just curious to see. I just want to see something saying this is why Crossfire Hurricane was predicated. I'm waiting to see the communication that Stroke, I guess, inputted. Just how this whole thing. I know we all know it's crap. I mean, we've known that for years. But I just want to see what he put down to start it all. I'm just very curious. That's all.
I will do a little bit of research. I'm pretty sure we have at least like a redacted opening EC, and it makes reference to a referral from a foreign diplomat, which is
Oh, the
understood to
friendly
be
foreign, the friendly foreign government.
yeah,
I guess they're referencing the Downer situation.
that's right. Yep,
Okay, yeah, that's oh my god, very frustrating.
it is. Yeah,
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate all the great work you do, man.
thank you. I appreciate you.
Have a great night.
You too. All right. Like I said, I'll open it up. I mean, if anybody else wants to talk or comment on the ICA report materials that were released, I'll obviously open it up. Like I said, MB and Walker Player might join us here shortly. But otherwise, I'll try to find something to talk about.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna when I was talking about the Trump talking to the president of Mexico and the Australia, and the transcripts were leaked. That's when I said to myself at the time, I said the FBI is listening to Trump inside the Oval Office, and they're the ones who are actually leaking all this to destabilize his presidency, because he had so many leaks going on all the time. Every day there was another leak. I was like, the people in the White House aren't leaking. Because it's like a camaraderie. If you're working with these people, why would you be leaking? And I said at the time, I said, this doesn't make any sense. They were probably wiretapping him anyway because he was under investigation. But I think they were leaking all this stuff out that would come out all the time, because how else would all these leaks come out? They were listening to his phone calls. The place was probably bugged.
Yeah, and I bet it's probably standard procedure to some extent to listen in on phone calls that the president has.
Yeah, but not leaking them.
Right, not leaking them, obviously, but I think they'll probably have transcripts and things like that pretty regularly. But yeah, you had like Eric Chermilla and a couple other individuals that he worked with on the National Security Council, and you had some of these same individuals involved in like some of the Russiagate stuff, and it's like, you look at some of the decisions they made about all this intelligence when it went to Russiagate, and then what they did by leaking some of these transcripts. I mean, that first impeachment is a good example. If you look at what Trump actually said, it's a really contrived narrative to suggest that he was trying to strong arm Ukraine in any way. I mean, you really have to try to believe it, and it's really just not there. So to leak it and then to foment this narrative for an impeachment, they were just trying to politically injure Donald Trump, and
yes,
it's a very ugly business, and that's part of my personal frustration with the Trump administration, because by keeping a lot of this stuff classified, they're really protecting some of these individuals, and I know they're doing a pretty good job about identifying some of these individuals and terminating them. But if they delved into this with 2 feet, I mean, they would get the political capital, right? I mean, if we actually had the emails where they're talking about including the Steele dossier, whether it's James Comey or whoever's talking about it, like, people would love to read that stuff. Like, it would actually help drive the news narrative that they get political capital off of to continue doing this kind of stuff. But then you put out this release and you set the narrative of, okay, Obama did this conspiracy. It's like, well, that's not really supported by the evidence. Now, it's probably true. I mean, I've advocated, okay, it's true, but we really just need the underlying details. We need to identify who are the analysts, that were involved in this decision, who supported it, who didn't, and that's part of my frustration.
And then I had one other quick thing, which I never understood, was they know Dork Danchenko. They knew Danchenko, who wrote most of the stuff in the Steele dossier. They knew in January of 2017 that was all BS, right?
Yep.
But Comey doesn't say anything. Then Comey's fired, right? And what I never understood is why didn't even when it came out later that Danchenko, it was all lies. I don't understand why any of the Congress people, when Ray would go up and testify, I don't know why any of the Congress people didn't say to Ray, they go, listen, Director Ray, when did you know the Danchenko stuff in the dossier was all made up lies? And why didn't you tell us, the Congress, or the American people, when you knew this? It's a big scandal that he never said anything, even after Comey left.
It is a big scandal, and I think this is just my opinion, but like, the point they made Igor Danchenko a confidential human source for the FBI gave them some justification for withholding some of that information. And technically that January interview was before he was a confidential human source, but then, you had like Devin Nunes out there by March, wanting to talk to the primary subsource, and they were withholding him because basically they had just made him a confidential human source, and then they used his information in like 2 or 3 dozen other investigations. And I'm shocked, like, there isn't like a big drive to go identify those investigations, because it might not be Russiagate, but that's a scandal in and of itself. But you're right. I mean, to have this interview floating out there from January 2017, and then you just continue driving the narrative. I mean, they went and got another FISA warrant on Carter Page after they had interviewed Igor Danchenko and said, I made all this up. So,
Right.
Then by the summer of 2017, they were finding that Chuck Dolan had actually given them some of the allegations in the dossier. And then in more recent weeks, there was a release about certain information that seems to be sourced directly from Alexandra Chalupa. And potentially she was working on more of the dossier, which we sort of knew. We sort of suspected that, but that link was established a little bit more concretely in the last couple of weeks. So it's pretty bad because we're just now getting these documents, but the FBI had them. So
yeah, but
not a good look.
Yeah, but what I think is also strange is in 2022, the Republicans won the House, and they were running the Judiciary Committee for 4 years. What is this year? 2020. So let's say 3 years. In other words, it seems like, I know this sounds very conspiratorial, but like Jim Jordan seems to have been like, what do you call it? What do they call that? Oh, it's coming to me.
It's compromised.
Yeah, it's compromised, or right, because there's something going on, because he was all when he was in the minority, he was all gung ho, and then he's the chairman for the last 3 years. Like you said, he's compromised. Maybe it's due to, what do you call it? Allegations when he was a assistant coach or something. But he seems what I'm looking for was incapacitated.
Yeah, and I'm going to get back on my soapbox here for a minute, and Walkfire is going to join us here in a couple more minutes, it looks like. But, one of the things that I've talked about, like I interviewed for a position on the Weaponization Committee. And in the context of that interview, like I met with Steve Castor, who's like the top Republican lawyer for the House, was involved in an impeachment trial and everything. And I told him like a whole bunch of stuff. Like, I had just gotten a bunch of FOIA documents and everything, and it raised some serious questions about the DNC hack attribution. And they expressed no interest at all in a Russiagate investigation. Mm-hmm. And they had a couple other ideas. They were going to look at the FBI's targeting of like some school board people or whatever. But then like they did not want to do a Russiagate investigation, and they made that clear to in the following months, like, some of my connections, were kind of telling me like people were going to Jim Jordan and they're saying, let's do a Rushgate. We want to do this and that. And they're offering like vague excuses about like, oh, we can't find we can't find staffers to go do that and this and that. But like in reality, Jim Jordan just didn't want to do it. And I don't know if somebody's holding something over his head. Like there's some allegations about his time at Ohio State and some of the sexual abuse that was going on.
Yes.
Or I don't know, maybe Jim Jordan's just lazy and maybe he really just doesn't want to do any work. And that's a possibility. But for all these members of Congress that are out there today trumpeting this release from Tulsi Gabbard, it's shameful because they have subpoena power. They could go investigate this right now. They could have 30 subpoenas out tomorrow and call people in and make them testify. They could go look at the DNC hack. They could do a lot of things, particularly because they have the presidency, as a Republican as well.
Yes.
And they just don't want to do it. But they're going to sit there and take a lot of credit for what they claim to be as proof as being right. And it's pretty shameful.
Yeah. And then, like, I'll wrap it up, like the Russiagate story, in other words, they spied on Trump's campaign, and then after he unexpectedly won, which was to me was like a black swan event, it seemed like he didn't want to win, and then after he won, then they tried to stage a soft coup on him, and no, he's been held accountable. And it just this I'm not saying I'm obsessed about this, I'm not, but it's one of these things that I'm always like, they talk about institutions like, you hear about Comey and Brennan and MSNBC. We have to have trust in our institutions, but these people destroyed these institutions, and I don't think I'm ever going to get over this.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, that's why I continued doing these spaces and following this and doing everything that I'm continuing to do, because nobody else is doing it. I mean, nobody in the media, nobody in Congress. Seems to be very limited efforts right now from the FBI or DNI or anybody to go look at this, and there's still a lot of questions. And I look at this and I see that one of the most brazen criminal conspiracies that this country has ever seen, because based on what my sources have told me, and based on what documents suggest, it looks like they spoofed the DNC hack to set a favorable environment for the Steele dossier, and then they took the Steele dossier and used it as justification to get FISA warrants and to spy on Trump, and then to foment this narrative to injure him politically, to basically take back the presidency. And it's a scandal, and I'm floored that with millions of people in this country, it's a very small number that understand the nuances of this or are familiar with the documents to an extent that they can talk about it. So,
and also,
not
and you know what I think?
What's that?
What also is very interesting to me is, and then I'll definitely wrap it up. But Jake Tapper recently had this had a book out, about Biden and his failing health. But I've watched a lot of interviews he had. He had like a co-writer, I don't know his name, but I didn't hear anybody in the media talk to him about his coverage and CNN's coverage of the Russiagate hoax. Not one I've watched multiple interviews. I'd say maybe at least 6, and not one said, you didn't catch Biden's failing health, but let me ask you some questions about your coverage and CNN's coverage of the Russiagate, saga. And I think that's another interesting that the media doesn't want to really talk about it at all.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and I don't think any media outlet, you see all these outlets that hired all these different actors from Peter Strzok or Lisa Page or Andrew McCabe, and nobody wants to revisit their own reporting on Russiagate, and people have pointed to the Pulitzers that were won, and it's like it's a false narrative. They reported without verification details that were not true, and for that they got the most prestigious award in journalism, and they don't want to give them back, so they're not. There's a few retractions a couple years ago, but by and large, I mean, nobody's revisiting their own work, and I don't know what it's going to take to get to the point that somebody acts responsibly. That's one of my other pet peeves is like the conservative journalism world. They'll trumpet like the narrative, but they don't do investigations and they don't dig into the detail. And if you turn on Fox News, they'll say all day long, "Oh, we caught him," and Obama set this narrative, but they're not going into the esoteric details and offering like documents to actually prove anything. So it's apparently going to come down to like independent people like pushing this and hopefully exposing it to the point that other outlets are shamed into covering it.
I agree. All right, man. I'm going to head off again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Let me see here. Invite Anders Paul. Oops. Walker should be here within 5-10 minutes, I think, and that'll be good. Let me see if I got anything else. So pulling up the schedule of the December 9, 2016 White House Situation Room meeting, participants include Susan Rice. Susan Rice sent out a very unusual email to herself on basically like the last day of the administration, where she said something to the effect that Obama's directive was to conduct an investigation by the book or something like that. And it was a very weird thing to memorialize in an email to herself. Surprised, like, people have not really wanted to go talk to her more about that. Other participants, Neil Eggleston, White House counsel, DNI, James Clapper, Andrew McCabe from the FBI, John Brennan from the CIA, General Dunford, Richard Leggett from the NSA, Loretta Lynch was there, Mary McCord, Secretary Johnson of DHS, Avril Haines, Lisa Monaco, Ben Rhodes, Chief of Staff McDonough was there, and then you had some other people from NSC, including Celeste Wallander, and it's basically like the who's who of like Russiagate is pretty much on this schedule for this meeting. So everybody was involved, and pretty amazing that they thought they could put out an ICA. I mean, if you're going to do an ICA within like 2 weeks, like around Christmas time and holidays, it's pretty amazing.
Oh, I had one last thing, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
If you don't mind. It's sadly, this is again a symbol of, like you're talking about, McCabe works for CNN, and they have all these, Brandon works for MSNBC. Anyway, sadly, this was when I was like, this was like fiction on TV. The day when Trump was shot, I'm watching CNN. I only watch CNN not to watch it, but just like to monitor it, to see what their narratives are. And guess who was on call that night as the security person? That this, the national security person. They have someone on call 24 hours a day for breaking news. Guess who was the person who is pontificating about Trump being shot on CNN?
It was McCabe.
Yes, it was McCabe.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I was so surreal. I was like, I can't believe, this is McCabe's number one enemy, or Trump's number one enemy, or number two enemy, and they're pontificating about the shooting on CNN. And I was just like I could. Did you feel the same way when you saw that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think they brought McCabe on when they raided Trump's house.
Oh,
too.
God, did they?
I think they had him on there. So it is pretty amazing to have. I remember watching that. I was, I saw it live, and then I turned on CNN for more extensive coverage. And yeah, I remember seeing McCabe on there commenting about, Trump being shot, which is
right, but
which is very unusual.
Right, but also, you don't think CNN can read the room and call somebody else up? You know what I mean? It was almost. I'm not saying they were doing to upset people, but it was just so inappropriate.
Yeah, I agree.
But that's my spin. I promise you, that's my last talking for the evening. Thanks again, man.
Oh, no problem. You got anything else?
I'm good, but this whole Russiagate thing, and remember, but also people forget, when Trump said, Russia, if you're listening, release Hillary's emails. You'll be like, I forget. He said something like, release the emails and, everyone will be very happy or something. He says something, but people forget when he did that, that was Trump. Originally when Trump was running for president, he would just go on stage and riff for 40 minutes. Remember? No teleprompters. Remember all this?
Yep.
Yep,
that's true.
Right. But when he said that, he was just riffing. This is later on, towards the end of the campaign, he put on the teleprompter to say a message. But when he said, "Hey, Russia, if you're listening," he was just riffing and making a joke, because he made a lot of jokes. But he'd go like this. Someone would complain about the wall, and he'd go, "The wall just got 20 feet higher." He would just like riff. And then, but they made this sound like so sinister. He was just riffing. He wasn't reading off a teleprompter. Like I said, the last month of the campaign, 2016, he went on the teleprompter just to stay a message and just, finish it out. But he was riffing that day. And people forget the majority of his campaign, he would just go on stage and riff for 40 minutes. They don't say that.
Yep. You're right.
Anyway. All right, man. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you. We've got man here. What's up, dude?
Hey, how you doing? Good to chat with you.
Yeah, good to chat with you. You've been pretty quiet the last couple of years.
Yeah, well, hopefully things will start heating up and be a good chance to jump back in a little bit.
Yeah, I hope you do, man. You're obviously extremely talented.
Well, I've enjoyed watching what you've been doing. You've been busy, a busy guy over the past couple of years. It's been great.
Yeah. Well, I figure if I can get you the right documents, you can solve this, and we can all take a vacation.
Well, that'd be nice. That'd be nice. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I just actually just kind of jumping in a little bit late on the happenings of the day, but just listening to your recap, it's kind of hard to disagree with almost anything you've said. Really seems about right. A good summary of where we are today. But a couple of things, though, I do sort of take from what just came out. Before you guys were talking about the media, during the Mueller time and the frenzy and all of that. And one thing I guess I kind of take from what came out today, though, is something that happened right after the election. Before the election, there was that media frenzy all about Russia, 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 Trump, stories every day. And then it's kind of one of those stories that you can't find a story about to prove it, because there were no stories right after the election. It was just very noticeable. Everything just went silent, and it all stopped. And then it started to pick up about 2 weeks later. And so, I mean, for me, in my opinion, just with what came out today, sort of just solidifies my thoughts on it, that um, there was a bit of a transition from being a kind of a Clinton campaign operation, and then there was this meeting on the 7th, and then things started right back up again with the same stories back in the media. But I mean, it's just one of those things, unless you were kind of living through it and sort of watching the news every day at that time, you wouldn't really notice it now. But I think that's kind of an important thing that I remember from that time period, is just that pause right after the election where everything just went quiet until something changed. And for me, anyway, I get the feeling that meeting that in December was the thing that changed. Just want to.
Well, I think you're hitting on a great point, and that's precise analysis. I think you're exactly right. I mean, obviously, I think Hillary Clinton expected to win, so she was obviously devastated. And then in December, it seems to be they were picking up the pieces, and that seems to coincide with some of the narratives being set and some of the stories and leaks. Because one of the other things, Clinton, well, specifically John Podesta, got with uh, the Fusion GPS guys, and they pulled in oh, what's his name? Uh, the TDIP guy. I'm drawing a blank on his name, and they started talking about how to get more funding to continue investigating Donald Trump and continue fomenting some of these narratives, and they gave. I'm going to do a search real quick. Drawing a blank on his name.
Yeah, is that where?
Integrity Project.
Is that Dan Jones? No.
Yeah, you're right. Dan Jones. Yep. So they got with Dan Jones in like December, and I think there's a House Intelligence Committee that has a blurb about this too. But like TDIP was set up in January 2017, basically with the sole intent of funding Fusion GPS and continuing this investigation, and they did so with fundraising help from John Podesta, and they pulled in some of the other organizations that Dan Jones was part of as well, and they basically they gave millions of dollars to Fusion GPS. Like most of TDIP's operating budget was filtered to Fusion GPS. I think they funded Christopher Steele as well, and sort of that sort of ties into what you're saying, because in December they sort of started spinning that up to continue this, and um, you know, sort of ties in at least.
Yeah, well, and you can kind of see too. I mean, just the people who would know would be able to understand what some of the leaks that were coming out after that meeting, the significance of them. In other words, this is coming from higher up, so it gives you a little cover to uh, continue to do things, perhaps. And I mean, you kind of see a little bit of it before the election with the way the FBI was not really. Comey was pushing back on things and that sort of thing before the election, and then things sort of changed, and it did seem like there was a difference. It was a difference in the way things were being run, or it went. I guess, in my opinion, it just went from kind of more the Clinton-led plan to being more of a different plan, a different a different lead on things after the election. And that pause right there was, I just distinctly remember it from that time period. But anyway, it's unfortunate there wasn't more detail released, as you say, but um, that is interesting. I tell you, the other one you mentioned, I'll have to just do a search on this, was the Chalupa Danchenko connection. I guess I missed that. I'll have to run a Twitter search to find that.
Yeah, that came out a few weeks ago, and I don't know that they connected her directly to Danchenko, but essentially connected her to Fusion GPS, and then the same things that she was bringing to Fusion GPS ended up showing up in the dossier.
Gotcha. Okay. Yes, because that was a link that I was trying to for a very long time, looking for any way to find a direct link, and never could find anything. Just a little theory I'd had and was searching for. But anyhow, I'll have to go back and try to find what that was in the last few weeks. Read more about it. But anyhow, well, I tell you what, I may have to let you go. I was just going to chime in and say hey, and enjoy your work, and keep on trucking.
Yeah, I appreciate you popping in, and obviously I hope you'll hang out a little bit more with us, and hopefully we can all review a lot more release documents soon, and try to figure out what happened.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah. Alrighty. Thanks for coming. Let me see what else. Let me see where Walkfire is. All right, a few more minutes on Walkfire, looks like. If anybody else has anything, go ahead and pop in. Keep this going for a few more minutes, see if Walkfire frees up, and then we'll take it from there.
What do you think about? I mean, there's so many. What he calls it, strings to this whole story. But what do you think about Mifsud? Do you think he was Do you think he was the CIA or the FBI told him to tell Papadopoulos about the Russians having some kind of I forgot, it was information about the election or something? I forgot what the story was.
No.
And then because it's such a strange. And then they had a honeypot with Stephen Halper. I mean, this whole story's crazy.
Yeah, so I mean, part of this is driven by the narrative set by Papadopoulos in a book that he wrote, and I'm not saying he didn't believe it, but you know, he was in a tough situation, so he was trying to make sense of a very confusing time. But Mifsud probably has connections to British intelligence, but Mifsud, I don't think, was tasked by anybody to get close to the campaign. What appears to have happened is, you know, Papadopoulos was sort of shooting his mouth off a little bit, and he didn't say anything that others weren't speculating on. I mean, if you go back to some of the early stories about Clinton's email server,
Oh, the story.
even like the New York Times in 2015 were suggesting, like, well, Russia or maybe China or Iran could hack this server. So there was like a program on Fox News like the night before this meeting with Papadopoulos and Mifsud, and on Fox News they were talking about, well, the Russians might have all these emails, you know, and unfortunately that's sort of characteristic of Fox News, where they offer narratives and speculation, and then, you know, Papadopoulos kind of suggested, well, you know, maybe the Russians, you know, have the emails or whatever, and that became, you know, the Russians do have their emails, and the narrative got twisted up because Clinton's emails were never released, but when the DNC emails were released, they got some justification to create, you know, implications to that statement that really aren't true, because if Papadopoulos was saying that he thought the Russians had Clinton's emails, and then the DNC's emails come out, like that's not the same thing. So, you know, to use that to set this narrative is pretty inaccurate. But no, I don't think Mifsud was tasked by anybody. There are some employees that were referred by John Durham for further investigation, and they're connected to the embassy. Nobody has any idea whatever happened to that investigation. It was like a spin-off investigation from Durham, and yeah, I mean, around the embassy, there's probably some employees that did invite Papadopoulos out that were probably giving some reporting back to the intelligence community about Papadopoulos, but yeah, we haven't gotten any more information on that necessarily. So
Yeah, because the way it sounded like Papadopoulos was implying that Mifsud was given information by the FBI possibly, or the CIA, and they to you know, just in a casual conversation, and then I think then he met he met some guy from Australia. I forgot what his title was. He met, and the guy from Australia called up the FBI in the FBI. Remember the story?
yeah, you're not talking about Downer. You're talking about the other guy, right?
Right. What I'm talking about, I don't want to say he used to be an ambassador to Australia. Yeah. I don't want to say he was a prime minister. He was a very high echelon person in Australia. So like somehow or another he meets him, and the Papadopoulos, it sounds like he was fed information, so he'd speak to this guy, you know, and then that's how they opened the investigation. Also, you know, with the FISA warrants, you know, they were FISAing you know, Papadopoulos. They did 2 hops. You're easily at Donald Trump.
Well, they never did a FISA warrant on Papadopoulos, which is like the weird thing, because that is supposedly the predication to the Carter Page. That's right.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm saying with the Carter, there's so many strings, but like the Carter Page. In other words, they were going after Carter Page to get 2 hops to Trump.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten really any detail on, you know, where those hops exactly landed. But
if you got Papadopoulos, he goes to someone closer. Maybe he's talking to Steve Bannon one time, and then you're at Trump.
Yeah,
but
true.
Also, I think Carter Page was suing, but I really haven't been paying attention if his suit was dismissed or not. Because I should follow that up.
There was something a couple weeks ago. I think it was at the Court of Appeals level, and Carter Page lost again. So I think he's going to try to go to the Supreme Court, but yeah, he's been destroyed in the courts. Basically, without it's really unfair. I really hate to see it for Carter Page because he deserves to be able to bring a lawsuit and for what happened to him. So yeah, that came out a few weeks ago.
Yes. And then they had honeypots going on with Downer. I mean, this whole story is just crazy.
Well,
I mean,
that has not been established, and you know, there was like a honeypot story that Cash Patel debunked a couple months ago now.
Durham. If you watch Matt, I love Matt Gaetz. I mean, whenever he was on the Judiciary Committee, he was fantastic. He was really good. And when he was there, when Durham, what do you call it, testified, and he asked him about something, and he goes, "Oh," and then he goes, "Oh, who in the FBI sent the honeypots?" And Durham goes, I can't tell you who the FBI sent." He goes, "Oh, so the FBI sent them."
Yeah.
But if you get a chance, watch Gaetz question Durham. It's very good.
Yeah, I'm probably overdue to go back and watch that one.
Anything with Gaetz is amazing. He should have been AG, but obviously had a lot of problems because he was like, as you know, his quote is like he's a firebrand, and you know, he would have been a great AG. You know, sometimes I'm glad to see Tulsi's like doing some heavy lifting, but like before this came out today, I thought Bondi, Cash, and Bongino, I thought they've been I thought they were incapacitated by the deep state. You know what I mean? They just went off the grid. What happened to these people? You know, they've been in the office for 6 months. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad Tulsi this came out today, but I was.
Oh, I think you cut out there for a second, but I'm gonna grab Walkfire.
All right, take care. Thanks.
To speak. Yeah, thank you. Walkfire, what's going on, dude? Uh-oh, Walkfire might be feeling shy. We'll give him a minute here. What's up, dude?
Hey, good evening, everybody. What have I
Good
missed?
evening.
What's going on in the world today?
Oh, not much. We were starting off the chat and talked about the new ICA reports and emails that came out, and then sort of meandered around for a while. We had come in, and he actually talked for a while there, and now we have you.
Cool.
What are you up to, man? You get a chance to read things today? You had too much going on, or?
I've gone through them once. I'll put it that way. Not with a fine tooth comb or anything, but read through them pretty quick. Thought that was some interesting revelations. You know, a lot of it is more seems to be kind of confirming what we've all suspected, but still feels kind of like a drip right now. I think there's definitely a lot more to the story here that hopefully they're not going to just focus on this ICA. Wasn't following the normal analytic standards line.
I agree with you, and I think I opened this up, and I don't know if I want to get back on my soapbox, but like I didn't really like that they attached a narrative to it, like on the official DNI website of like Obama doing this conspiracy thing, and then like to the extent they concluded like the Steele dossier was this additional information that took the confidence level from low to high, after the election. Like I feel like it would have been a really good move for them to actually include like some of the emails and stuff that actually talked about the Steele dossier being included. Like I didn't really like the conclusions that were offered without supporting the evidence.
Exactly. they made that connection for us without laying it completely out there.
Yep.
And so, I mean, I think there's a little bit of nuance there that either they're trying to dance around or trying to avoid, or maybe they're planning to get more of info about that out later. But yeah, without going too high up on my own soapbox, I think we have to remember that until BuzzFeed posted those, all the reports, there was no such thing as the Steele dossier. And so that's where things can get real confusing real quick. With Brennan saying, I never saw a dossier. And, well, what was it that was used to bolster it? Well, was it just one report from the dossier, or was it the whole, which reports were included? And, all of that sort of nuance is kind of going back to what you're saying of, today's release, they say, oh, it was the Steele dossier that bumped the confidence level up. And you're like, well, wait a minute. There wasn't a Steele dossier on January 6th. So what are you talking about here?
That's a good point. I didn't. You're exactly right. I hadn't forgotten, but I didn't think of that. That's a good point.
Well,
I mean, is there anything else that stands out? One thing I did want to get your take on, like, see if you agree with me, but like when I was reading like some of the summary points of the new mid-level ICA, it actually, to me, you could kind of pick up some of that influence from the Steele dossier. At least, some of the conclusory, paragraphs, even early on in that report, they really, they don't read like you would think a CIA or some analyst would write. Like it actually, seems very influenced by the dossier on some of these. But
well, I would agree a lot, and I think kind of my overarching theory picture that I'm starting to see, which again, we can, when there's so many blank spots in the story, you can put the pieces we do know together in all the different ways and come up with all sorts of different interpretations on what must have happened or what was actually going on. But I always try and remember, okay, we have Christopher Steele is a British citizen wanting to get information to the United States about things that are happening in Russia.
yep,
Who would normally be his contact for something like that?
somebody in the British government
Well, or who in the American government, I guess.
or the embassy, right? Is that what you're Is that what you're thinking, or
Or
no?
which agency, intelligence agency of ours deals with foreign citizens and foreign relations?
Well, that would be the CIA.
That'd be the CIA. So, I mean, I would think big picture wise, I mean, looking before 2016, whatever sort of relationship Christopher Steele has with the American government, I would assume most of that would be with the CIA versus the FBI. The FBI stuff is when it deals with domestic issues, which, of course, in 2016, the whole thing was okay. Well, is Putin's plans to disrupt an election? This is what the way they're viewing it. Is that a domestic issue or is that a foreign issue? My opinion, my thoughts that I would love to see confirmed, but again, this is just my thoughts, is that certain intelligence of his gets passed to the FBI when it deals with domestic issues, the election, whatever else the case may be. But when it's dealing with foreign matters, what's Putin hearing, what's Putin thinking, what's going on here and there, I would think that sort of intelligence would have gotten funneled to the CIA. So my theory is, at the end of the day, Christopher Steele was the main source for Brennan, not the quote Steele dossier. And that's how Brennan and Comey were able to weasel through everything. No, I never saw dossier. No, anything that was American, domestic, I funneled over to Comey. Okay, but anything that wasn't domestic, you were getting from Steele, or from Steele to the British government to Brennan, or however. But I think it's the same reporting stream, that Brennan was
That
getting stuff, and that the FBI was getting stuff, and that's why I think there was this fight behind the scenes that we only saw pieces of for a while several years ago. Of, did Brennan want it in and not Comey? Or no, Comey wanted it in and not Brennan. Oh wait, no, they both wanted it in. What's the deal? Oh well, we can't have it in the middle. We have to put it in an annex. Why? What's the deal here? Well, I think the issue was at the very, very top, Brennan, Comey, etc. I think they knew it was the same source, the same reporting stream, and they couldn't justify putting it in on the CIA side and saying we have high confidence in this, and then saying, but we can't use this, these dossier reports because they're trash. And I think they knew it was the same source reporting stream, and so that's why they had to come up with this way to include the dossier in the ICA. That's my theory.
That would be a pretty explosive revelation if Steele was passing information to the CIA as well.
Well, I mean, you start to look at that those last few days in July when Steele has to make some emergency trip over here right when Brennan's getting, hand-delivered intelligence from the British talking about, Putin wants Trump to win, and a picture starts to form. I'll put it that way.
Well, you're definitely right. And you think about the fusion cell that was set up with the CIA that Brennan headed up, and Durham tells us that fusion cell was set up because of the Clinton plan intelligence. But at the same time, they apparently discarded the Clinton plan intelligence, didn't include it in the ICA. So if they're willing to do that, you start wondering, like, did they start developing additional contacts, and maybe that includes Christopher Steele?
Yeah, well, and I mean, even the Clinton plan intelligence, I think that was a small part of what Brennan got that weekend. Was that a weekend? That was a weekend. Yes, I think, and there was something actually in the ICA today that we saw. There's a paragraph that talks about the SVR was, getting, had access to U.S. political and government institutions and had emails and was reporting it up in the form of foreign intelligence reports up to redacted. So,
Well,
go ahead.
SVR, that's Cozy Bear, right?
SVR is Cozy Bear, correct?
Yeah, and that's the part that actually seems to be legit, and that does tie into the Clinton plan intelligence, because what seems to have happened, I think, is the Dutch had basically hacked Cozy Bear, which is the SVR, and the SVR was picking up intelligence from some hacks that they had done legitimately. They had hacked the DNC. They appeared to have hacked Open Society Foundations and some other democratic organizations. And they were forming an assessment that Clinton was crafting this false narrative of interference and collusion, and that those intelligence reports were obtained by the Dutch. They were passed to the CIA and served as the basis of the Clinton plan intelligence, which they had by July, because they briefed President Obama on them. And I kind of forgot where I was going with that point. But
right, and I mean, and that's the key, right? So we know in March, the Rentera memo / email, and those first two articles came out in early 2017. One said it was email, between Rentera and Bernardo talking about how Debbie Wasserman Schultz had talked to Loretta Lynch. And then the other article says, it wasn't an email, it was more like a memo, which was kind of confusing. Okay, so it's a memo about an email. Okay, got that. Then you start to look at this, at the Clinton plan intelligence, and it is describing an exchange of Hillary Clinton approving this plan by her foreign policy advisor. So kind of the same thing. It's a memo or Russian intelligence report describing an email. Well, they're going through and they're hacking all these things again, and that's that same. What was it? So supposedly this plan was approved on the 26th. On the 27th, we know that's when Cozy Bear went and hacked a bunch of more Clinton, sent out a bunch of spear phishing emails to more Clinton campaign and Clinton personal office. And then on the 28th is when, the Clinton plan intelligence starts making its way to Brennan. So it's like, okay, so let's say they hack 10 email accounts on the night of the 27th. They're pouring through thousands of emails. They're summarizing, anything that looks important, and they send it on up the chain. And so what they send up the chain could be a list of 300 emails. Oh, here's one that says this. Here's one that says this. Here's one that says that. Here's one that says this. Here's one that says Hillary's going to try and stir something up. Here's one that says this. Here's one that says that. So, from the way I read Durham's report, where he describes Brennan's interview to him, is Brennan said, I didn't look at all 300 things. I didn't care about too much about the details of all that. In fact, that was the whole issue with why we couldn't look at stuff back in March, because we can't go look at American communications because we don't have any warrant or anything like that, and just because the Russians have it, and now we're being able to see what the Russians have on American citizens. We're not supposed to look at that, but we need to look at that. How do we make this work? And so Brennan's story is, I wasn't looking too specifically at all the specific summaries in these intelligence reports. I was just focused on the big picture of, oh my gosh, they've hacked all these emails and they're looking through all of our emails. And so I think the Clinton plan intelligence is a little bit overblown, or there's too much stock placed in it as if that was the only intelligence that was given to Brennan. It's just part of it. It's a small part of lots of summaries of emails that they were seeing. And that's why they had to have this fusion cell set up about, okay, we've got to be very careful on, does the FBI have any reason to look at, Joe Blow's email? Okay, so there is a Russian report that one of them talks about Joe Blow. So, okay, we can let the FBI look at that piece of it. And so there was a lot of information sharing, but lots of guardrails put up. So there's some sort of there's a justification for why they could do it when you realize, of course, that they were all very biased at this point. Then you've got the Papadopoulos information coming at the same time, and they say, oh my gosh, this guy knows about it, and here we are, we're reading this thing over here that says that, they're trying to denigrate Hillary. That's why they jumped so quick on the Papadopoulos information. But the problem is they didn't just check into the Papadopoulos story and dismiss it or anything. That solidified for them in the summer, okay, Trump's a bad dude. Let's get the guy before he gets elected. And it just twisted the entire rest of the investigation. And by the end, when Obama's like, okay, what do we have? I'm like, well, we really don't have shit still. He goes, okay, no, we can't. Nope. Take that part out. Only give me the stuff that says we had plenty of shit and get that out before I get out of office. That's when it got weaponized. That's when it really became, we have to cover up and lie about what was going on, in my opinion.
Well, I think part of it. I mean, I think you're making a good point about the fusion cell and sort of the fire hose of information they were wading through. But like Peter Strzok was pulled into a meeting for the fusion cell like within a few days of its set up, and then within a few weeks of that, the CIA had made a referral to the FBI for them to go look at this Clinton plan intelligence and this alleged plan to stir up like this narrative. And I mean, they just had too many pieces that were pointing them in an opposite direction. And
True, and there's parts of the referral memo that were redacted, so we can't know exactly what was in there. But if it's just stir up a controversy, where do you land on the whole First Amendment political dirty tricks aren't illegal thing? It didn't say amplify it to the FBI. Now I know that's out there, that we've heard about, but the referral memo didn't say anything about it. It was just like, use this as a weapon. I mean, Trump had already been using it on the first half of the year against Hillary. She's under investigation. She should be disqualified from running. She can't be president. Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. They haven't finished their investigation yet. That doesn't matter. As long as she's being investigated, no. This is horrible. So for a Clinton campaign to say, hey, look, he just said, hey, Russia, if you find her emails, the press will reward you. They always cut that part out. But, oh, this is perfect. We can twist this in the media, as part of a political campaign. When the FBI sees that, what are you really investigating at that point, other than saying, hey, let's keep an eye out on what sort of intelligence we're getting. When a DNC attorney comes in with some crazy cuckoo shit, that's when the red flags should have been going off all over the place. Okay, we already know that you're planning on amplifying this Trump Russia stuff, and now you're secretly coming in with this wacko server thing to try and kickstart an investigation. That's where the brakes should have been hit hard. But again, at that point, they'd already, started seeing Manafort and Kalimnik, and they started seeing, the Carter Page stuff, and oh, he's being evasive, and so at that point, they're just so far into their biased view of what's going on that they didn't stop and say, wait a sec, how much of this is being influenced by the Hillary campaign?
yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair point. And the point that you raised about Sussman going to the FBI with some allegations, and that should have put the brakes on. You could say the same thing about, I think it was the first version of the FISA warrant that they had. And I think that in that warrant, they had asserted that Christopher Steele was being paid by Clinton, and then they redrafted it and they sort of diminish that connection, or said it less conclusively. But they should have known, I think, that there was merit to this Clinton plan intelligence, and to the extent that they knew that Steele was working for Clinton, there's just too many warning signs that they just sped right past. But I wanted to ask you, like, the state of where we are today, like you kind of said, like, we're getting this drip of information. We're getting conclusions, not necessarily the underlying documents. Do you think that's going to continue, or do you think there's like momentum now towards like larger declassifications and releases?
Well, that's tough. Am I still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, okay, I thought I heard it click off. So much of this, the stuff we've been hearing the last couple weeks has just been conjecture. the Brennan is going to be indicted for perjury, which, in my opinion, if that's the only thing they've got on him for lying to Congress, I think that's a joke. And in fact, I think there's a few people in Congress that were informed and that they're covering it up just as much. But where was I going with this? Oh, Paul Sperry's article in Real Clear Investigations a couple days ago, where he talked about this meeting last Sunday with DNI. And what are they going to try? He said that they're almost certainly going to be declassifying the classified appendix to Horowitz and the classified appendix to Durham, which are oh my gosh, that's the Holy Grail. That's the dual Holy Grails right there. But of course, just because it's declassified doesn't mean it gets released. Is it declassified in order for an internal investigation? Is it declassified in order to turn stuff over to Congress? And just because Congress gets something doesn't mean they're going to turn stuff over and show the public. So I'm trying not to get my hopes up too much, but I think with the leaks of all this happening, like it's they want the public to know in some sense, and so I don't think they can just rest on their laurels with this release today. I think more stuff has to come. It's really just going to be a question of, I think they're going to go to Congress and say, Congress, you can release what you want, and then Congress will decide yay or nay to a bunch of it. If you remember back in 2020, when Lindsey Graham started pushing a bunch of stuff out, including the Danchenko's interview and the Papadopoulos transcripts of some of the CHS meetings. Like, oh man, look at all these documents. Oh yeah, he gets them, he turns around, he publishes them for us. This is great. When you start looking at it, there were a bunch of things that the FBI turned over to Congress that they didn't release to the public, strangely. There's a couple missing transcripts of Papadopoulos and CHS's, the ones with Azra Turk. Those weren't released, even though I ended up FOIAing the cover letters. Because every time the FBI would turn over a production to Congress, it had a cover letter saying, okay, hey, here's, our next set of stuff, Bates numbers, XYZ through whatever. And some of them would say, this release is unclassified in its current form, or this release is a transcript or whatever. And so some of them said, I think one of the Papadopoulos transcripts, it's like, and this is unclassified in its current form. So Congress has it, it's declassified. They could turn it over or, post it on their website tonight if they wanted to, but they won't. Why? I don't know. We also know that Brian Otten wrote a 2-page memo to the higher ups in the FBI a couple weeks after the Danchenko interview, talking about some of the discrepancies. I can't say with 100% certainty, but just looking at the Bates numbers, looking at what Lindsey Graham had requested from the FBI earlier, it seemed like they were providing him all the stuff he had requested. That was one of them. He got it. He didn't turn it over. He didn't, make it public. Why? There's little things like that make me not trust Congress to give us the full picture either, and also that Congress does know more than they're letting on. They'll come out and they'll talk about this is ridiculous. We don't know. The public needs to know, when they have a lot of the information themselves, and they just won't. They won't show it.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and I think we talked about some of those extra documents Senator Graham didn't release a few years ago, but you could make the same point about Senator Grassley, and I love some of the oversight work that he's done, but like I know DARPA has given him some documents that I've been fighting tooth and nail for years in the courts, and Senator Grassley has them. unredacted and could release them conceivably at any time. And I hope I hope there isn't a trend where they just release it to Congress. Like I think there's enough justification where they can do proactive releases and just put it out for the public. And I think that would be really good. Do you think somebody's actually going to go back and look at the DNC hack at all, or are we still like light years away from that?
I don't know about light years away, but I think that's one that either A, no one wants to touch, or if they do, it's not until a lot more of the bigger picture is out, right? Like looking through some of the stuff that came out today, the ICA, it talks about, or the September ICA talked about the FBI and the NSA having low confidence in that one analytical judgment. And a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, they had low confidence that the DNC was hacked by the Russians. But looking at it closer, it was, no, they had high confidence it was hacked by the Russians. They just had low confidence that it was the Russians then providing it to WikiLeaks. And so that's where kind of this question comes in of who turned over the emails to WikiLeaks. And another place in there it says, we feel pretty good about it because we know that Russian intelligence had these emails, but we just don't. I mean, right, when you get an email and you copy an email, you're making a copy of it. So lots of other people could have had the emails too. And so they don't know which party, whether it was a Russian party or a insider, threat from the government or from the DNC itself, or some other foreign adversary or foreign ally or whoever that actually was leaking them. My opinion, there's lots of evidence and everything that it was coming from somewhere else, but that doesn't mean that Russia didn't have them as well, and Russia hadn't hacked us or hacked the DNC. And I think that's probably a big part of the October 7th attribution issue too, right? Is at some point there in mid to late September, the intelligence community said, screw it, we're going all in. We're going to pin this on Russia, even though they didn't have full confidence that Russia was behind all of it.
So, I think that's a key point. And I think that's something that makes the ICA potentially misleading, because I think at various points they attribute it to Russia, but they're not specific about whether it's SVR or the GRU. And that leaves some of that open to interpretation or misrepresentation, because if you say Russia hacked the DNC, that's actually true. I mean, I think the SVR and Cozy Bear did hack the DNC, and I think they probably did have some of those emails that were released. But that's very different from saying or concluding that Russia was behind like the Guccifer 2.0 persona or something of that nature. And that's an aspect. I have to go back and reread the ICA, but if you say Russia had some of these emails, I can believe that. But I want to see the detail on like the Guccifer 2.0 persona, because that's the part people recognize. That's the part where people like, did Russia actually do this and mount an influence campaign? And it's an important point to distinguish between hacking, which is bad, and mounting an influence operation that includes like publishing them through DC leaks and the Guccifer 2.0 persona, and then sending them to WikiLeaks. And that's something that I think is lacking in this document.
Yeah, I agree. I think, who knows what the ultra classified version of the ICA includes. But I think you're right. I think even this one dances around that in such a way to obfuscate it a little bit. We know Russia had it, but we can't actually connect them sending them over to WikiLeaks or Guccifer 2 or DC Leaks. And that's where they spun the narrative, and that's where they went with it. And they said, we're just going to go all in. We're going to go all in. We're going to make this the story, this the narrative, and damn you if you try and find us on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look what it's spun into, right? Like looking at this document now, and you think, man, like, yeah, Russia's always hacked us. We've always hacked them. Okay, hooray! But the long term ramifications on pinning this on Russia, not just domestically to get Trump, but internationally, right? And it was kind of a double edged sword against Trump, right? They're worried that Trump's going to go soft on Putin. So, okay, if it is true that Trump is working with Putin, well, then let's make sure and gin it up. And if it's not true that he's working with Putin, but tries to get too friendly with him, well, at least we'll have this narrative that we can use to make Trump back off and not seem too friendly. We will keep Trump from making peace with Russia because that will play into the narrative that he's working for Putin. So Trump wasn't able to, go as far as he probably would have liked to or could have, and settling this whole thing down before we had, millions of Ukrainians slaughtered and billions of our dollars sent over there to keep funding the military industrial complex.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And then you got to start thinking, man, how many times have they done this before? Maybe not this wide, grand scale, but to the extent of, spinning up a narrative to keep negotiations from going through or whatever it is, it's mind-boggling.
It is. I mean, I really hope we get a lot more documents. I mean, we are 6 months into the administration now, so hopefully this is going to lead to a larger push. And I made the point earlier. I think if Trump just declassified literally everything and didn't worry about intelligence sources and methods, which are ancient by this point. I mean, they're talking about years ago. We could actually read this stuff for ourselves, and we could sort of move on as a country, finally, and get back to other, domestic and international priorities. But
Yeah, the another kind of issue though I've been twirling in my head is, for a long time I figured Trump couldn't declassify a bunch of stuff because it was foreign intelligence from our allies and treaties and everything like that. It says, hey, if we're going to give you this stuff, you can't declassify it unilaterally. And we said, okay. And so then when we get it, we can't declassify it. And so I thought for a long time that's probably a big part of it. But then another wrinkle on top of that I've started wondering about is, what if the foreign allies intelligence agency was doing something wrong? Without getting too far into it, I mean, I think the Dutch spying on Cozy Bear, getting over to Brennan, I think that was getting funneled through the British government over to us. And that's my thought, and I think Steele was kind of in that chain too. And so hypothetically, let's say this was getting passed to British intelligence, and Steele was getting some of his information from them, right? And then it coming down to us. So Steele's sources are good. He's getting legit information, but he's getting it illegally from the British government, and then it comes over to us. This is all a big hypothetical. So if Trump declassifies it for us so that we can see the whole story, so that we can finally put it behind us as a country, at the same time, it's going to cause an enormous scandal in the UK. And what does that do to them? What does that do to our relations? All that sort of mess that comes with it. Especially, during this time where Trump is, trying to broker peace deals all over the world. You don't want to piss off an ally or an adversary. Right now, you're trying to get everyone to be friendly. And so again, in this hypothetical, it's a very delicate line that he has to try and walk to get us the information that we deserve and that we need for us to be able to move on without also, releasing something that's not ours to release. That's something that the Brits got to go figure out, or whatever it is.
See, it becomes weird because, like, John Brennan called the Russians on August 4th, 2016, and he basically told them, officially, he told them, like, to stop meddling in our elections. But whatever he actually said, it caused Russia to cut off the access for the Dutch. So, like, that intelligence channel is already blown. And it feels like declassifying it now, like, it shouldn't cause any damage because the damage was already done. And yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. It could create problems for allies, but at the same time, like, Russia's looking for an excuse to stop the war, but like they can't be seen as weak. So, if you actually put the stuff out there and showed that the American government lied, which is true, lied about their involvement in hacking the U.S., we'll take the black eye, and then Russia might have justification to stop the war, and that could be a net positive, I think, for the world because we deserve accountability. If we did something wrong, and we don't want to be seen weak as on the world stage, it is what it is. To own that the American government lied about Russian interference and the entire narrative was made up by a political party of the United States.
Yeah.
And our allies bought into it. Like, yes, it's going to be hugely embarrassing, but, if that's what happened, like, let's just put it out there and move on.
Right. Well, and again, I mean, that's the you could say the beauty of it, of, everything that happened to Trump first term, and then, out for a term, and then able to come back now. And I think in his first term, if he declassified this and showed Putin, whoops, we lied, yeah, that'd be pretty embarrassing to the whole country as a whole. This way, now he's able to come out and say, yeah, they lied. And by being this far removed from his first term in, he can concede on this point, and it's also a win for him. Like, he can declassify this and give Putin, the cover he needs to pull back and slow down on the war. He gives himself, more of a, he's able to show more about what the Democrats did to him. And so it's a win-win for him at this point, to a certain extent.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I hope Donald Trump is listening right now. Maybe he's one of these anonymous accounts that are listening.
Well, of course he is. He is. He wouldn't skip
Of course
our
he
faces.
is. Yeah, I mean, we've done so many of these. Like, we spent years on this. So, like, at least for my part, I'm certainly frustrated because you sort of expected, like, after the first term where they're sort of hamstrung, and then like they try to get the binder out right before Trump left office, and that was a nightmare, and everything got messed up. And then you come to a second term where you think, okay, well, everybody's going to be prepared. Like you sort of know who's going to be in these roles, and we've had so much information develop in the last 4 years. You sort of expect, like, okay, they're going to hit the ground running. The first 6 months, documents are just going to be dropping out of the sky, and that really hasn't happened. So hopefully we get more. And sound like a broken record, but
No, I mean, and I do think we'll get more. It's just a question of how. I mean, let's not forget, Bongino is in there, Patel's in there. They want to get out as much as they can, um, and I still have faith in both of them. Again, to the extent that they can, to get stuff out there to us, not just to Congress. I think they want to get it out there to us. Um, what that will look like, I don't know. I mean, I get very frustrated with FOIA a lot because they do redact a bunch, but hopefully that they'll stop redacting as much. I've gotten some um, encouraging responses to some FOIAs that I filed for uh, lots of files from Durham and for the Crossfire Hurricane case files. They bounced me around for a couple of years on the Crossfire Hurricane thing, just over technicalities, and then once the new administration started and the binder got released, they kind of conceded on my appeal and said, okay, fine, we'll allow it. And so they sent it back to the FBI to start processing, but nothing's come through yet. And I don't know what processing is going to look like. Is it going to be completely redacted, or are there going to be some folks over there that say, no, you can't redact this or you can't redact that? I don't know. I don't know.
that's interesting. I think for my part, the government's still been a nightmare to work with, and they're still like putting up this front, and they're hitting me with Glomar and defending it. And I'd be curious. I guess I should put in more FOIAs and see how they go. But certainly FOIA has been a nightmare. And hopefully for that, they could change a lot just by acknowledging some things to overcome Glomar. And obviously the posture of exemptions and everything like that, they could reform that. I mean, they could actually fix the entire FOIA system and restore balance to the universe. But
Right. Well, and again, I mean, it might be through a process. A lot of things that get redacted are things, under the privacy exemption, where it's like, if this hasn't already been publicly acknowledged by, the interviewee or the FBI in some form or fashion somewhere, then we're going to redact it. And so, like, a lot of the Mueller files, there's random stuff that's unredacted, and you're just like, what? Why did they leave this open? Oh, it was probably someone did a Facebook post for 20 minutes and then deleted it or something like that. But for a lot of it, I can go find it out there in social media or in news articles or something. That's what's helped me pinpoint a lot of these people whose names are redacted. And so, applying that to now, it's like, okay, as we get the binder out, because that was a big thing that they were pushing back on me was I requested all the Crossfire Hurricane files, including Crossfire Fury and Crossfire Typhoon, and whichever. I named the case names and the case numbers because they've all been out there somehow, and they kept trying to Glomar me and say, nope, we haven't actually acknowledged those case names and those case numbers. So we can't confirm or deny any of those. I said, yeah, you did. Here it is in the, this, one of these documents that Congress released. Well, no, see, we released that to Congress, not to the public. And we didn't publicly acknowledge that. Okay, well, so when the binder came out and had a bunch of that stuff unredacted, I was able to say, okay, no more pussyfooting around this. This is posted on the FBI website. Here's the case number. Here's the case name. I'll give them to me. And they said, okay. But just how ridiculous it was that they would bounce me around on some of that stuff. And I even said that from one of my responses, I said, fine, take out the case names. I'll refile it. I'll just say the case for Carter Page and the investigation into Manafort and, the case that the Inspector General mentioned on page 42 about the New York investigation into Carter. Like, are you really going to make me do this? And they're just kind of, brush me aside again. It was just ridiculous. But then, I appealed after the binder was out. And I think it was less than a week. Maybe it was longer than that. That they turned around and said, yeah, okay, you're good. So,
Yeah.
it's by getting this stuff out there, by declassifying this stuff from even from the DNI and such, a lot of it is so circular. You got to get this released in order to get that released, in order to get the information to come back over here and get more of this released in order to finally see what this is. And it's by design in some sense, but again, and I do understand, and I don't think we should just release everything unredacted, because there are sources and methods that we still use, and I get all that, but to the extent, kind of like the binder was, there were still redactions, but very, very minimal. That's how it should be. That's how FOIA should be.
Well, yeah. One of the FOIA requests that I just had was for supporting materials to the October 7th Joint Attribution Statement. And after reading tonight's release, I have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure the only thing they gave me were a handful of pages from the September ICA report, which is pretty interesting. So I'll have to go back and confirm that, because I'm pretty sure that's what they gave me, which is weird.
And I think
But
was even been released somewhere else too, I think.
Yeah.
No, not all of it though. Maybe some of it, but highly redacted. Because that thing about the low confidence, I've definitely never seen before.
They bounced me around though. It went from like the CIA to Department of Homeland Security, and then the CIA had it again, and then we're like, okay, it's ready for release, and then the FBI, I think, wanted another review for like 6 months or something like that, and then it came out and they gave me like 4 pages, and it's like the filler pages, and it's like, that's so ridiculous. So,
but it's hard to just drop it, right? Because you've got some good stuff. It's surprising what they do end up releasing.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. So, all right. Did you have anything else, Walkfire? I might start wrapping this up. Oh, looks like Walkfire dropped out. I think I'm gonna start wrapping this up. We might do another one of these in a couple days. I keep thinking like we'll start doing regular chats again, especially because the administration seems to be postured to actually do like releases here. So hopefully on like a weekly basis, maybe we'll start doing these again, and sort of build it up and give it another go for a couple months here. So I appreciate everybody coming tonight. Like I said, we'll probably do another one in the next couple days, and I hope everybody has a good weekend. So I will see everybody next time. Thanks, Walkfire. Thanks to everybody that spoke. And I'm going to end it here. All right. See you guys.